Hello fellow humans, and this is my story about the lockdown. And currently Melbourne has had 5 lockdowns. 3 of those were short snap lockdowns, which all occurred this year, and the other 2 happened last year and were much longer. And the infamous Melbourne lockdown, which was Melbourne's second lockdown, was deemed one of the harshest lockdowns in the world last year, and it was 112 days of intense restriction followed by a few months of continually easing restrictions. The restrictions for the 112 days included an 8 p.m. to 5 a.m. curfew. Only one person from each household was allowed to go get groceries. All other retail was closed, no Targets, no Kmarts, none of that. One could only venture up to 5 kilometers from the house, whether that was to shop for the essentials or exercise. There were only 4 reasons to leave the house. You were only limited to an hour of exercise every day. All recreational activities were banned, only 10 people allowed at funerals, and meeting other people in any other situation was a complete no-no. Now, I just want to preface this by saying that this is just what I felt during the pandemic, and in no way, shape or form do I think that my experience is more important or painful than other people. And I know a lot of people have suffered a great deal more than I have during this pandemic, and my heart goes out to all of those people who may be struggling to provide or have lost family members to this virus. But I just want to share what it felt like to be in our lockdown, and I believe everyone's story is valid when it comes to this insane event that has taken over our world. Sometimes I think back on it and it all just seems like a distant jumble of memories and that I can't decipher anything clearly, but then other times I can so vividly remember all of the feelings that were washing over me at that moment. Since I'm still a student, when lockdown struck I was mostly in remote learning with a few odd weeks here and there when I was required to return back to school, while the other times I was just stuck in the sanctuary of my own home. And I couldn't really leave the house at all because we only had 4 valid reasons to leave, which was essential work, essential shopping, medical or caregiving, or exercise. I could only exercise for an hour a day. I didn't have to do the shopping in our house, and I also didn't have any essential work. And I thankfully remained very healthy all of last year and I didn't require any medical attention, but I just didn't leave the house. Which was also a bit of a problem because I had braces in at that time and they just sat there unmoved for a few months because the lockdown just completely locked down everything, and since the orthodontics isn't that essential of a service, it was also locked down, and so I was stuck with my braces for so long, and I actually had to get a whole year extra of braces because the orthodontics shut down. That wasn't a very happy time for me. So when lockdown first started, it was terrible. Since we already had holidays in a week, the school just gave us an extra week of holidays. Actually, the state gave everyone an extra week of holidays, and that extra week I was just lost. I was overcome by sadness and stress, and a sort of depressing feeling took over, and I was kind of lost. For one of the first times in my life, I hadn't planned to do anything with some extra free time, and I also didn't have some extra work to complete in that free time, and so I was just confused and shocked, and just looking at the situation in the world, it was just very eye-opening and actually pretty scary to someone who was just like me, who hadn't really thought that some of the stuff that we listened to in history would actually become a living reality. Once online learning started, it got a lot better because I'm a very independent learner. So I liked having all the control that I could have in what to study, when to study, what subject to study when to eat, what to eat. Because even though I had to attend online calls, I could still just choose to study another subject during that time than that subject, because then I could get all my work done at the time it was supposed to be done, and I also wasn't wasting any extra time even though I didn't want it. And having all this control over this aspect of my life provided me with a huge rush that was able to get me through most of remote learning. Another positive of lockdown is that since I had a little bit more time on my hands, I could choose what I wanted to eat, and I could also make it myself. And so I actually started to learn my way around the kitchen a little bit last year, and cooking became something that I quite started to enjoy doing during lockdown. And it was something that I pretty much only picked up during lockdown because other times I didn't really have the time to just make myself a meal. I was just like, okay, yeah, just the basic thing that I need to eat every day, I ate that, like a sandwich or just what we have for dinner usually. But I wasn't really making stuff like, baked goods or anything because I didn't have the time, and I just thought it wasn't really well worth the effort when you could just buy it from the store. Another thing that I started during lockdown, which I really came to start enjoying, and is something that would be my favorite hobby right now, and that is sewing. Because at that point, it had been a year since I'd taken a textiles class, and that was a subject that I actually didn't do very well in. I wasn't good at the theory, and I wasn't really good at the actual practical sewing bit. But I had just watched a Bernadette Banner video when she made the pirate shirt, and I was like, I'm going to make this. Even though I was not that skilled, actually I wasn't skilled at all, I didn't really know how to use a sewing machine, and I only had 1 wad of fabric. But I decided to make the shirt out of that fabric. And the finished product wasn't actually that good, and that was due to a plethora of reasons. One, I wasn't that good at sewing. Easy. And I couldn't even sew in a straight line. 2, I was using black fabric, so it was kind of see how things were lining up even when I was sewing. And as I was pinning everything down, it was also a little bit difficult to line it up. And the third most important reason is because I had the worst fabric in existence. Velvet. This fabric was moving around everywhere. I couldn't cut it in a straight line, I couldn't sew it in a straight line, and every time I even pinned it down, it was just moving. And so the finished product had a lot of imperfections, but for the first time in my life, as a perfectionist, I came to love something that I had made, even though it was not perfect, because I realized that I really enjoyed the process of doing that, and that it gave me joy to look at something that I had made. Even though it wasn't perfect, it was wearable and I could kind of hide the imperfections. And it actually has sat with me all year because I haven't really had the opportunity to wear it anywhere. But this year I went out and I got some ribbon, and I just did a row of ribbon next to where the most imperfections were, and it kind of just covered it up and gave it a more clean and new feel. And now I'm really excited to start wearing that. However, the good times didn't last the whole time, and nearing the last few weeks of lockdown, I was getting very emotionally and mentally drained. I was just burnt out. I had worked so hard all of lockdown on all of my subjects. I was handing everything in on time and I was doing it exceptionally well. But it's just those last few weeks of just consistently being stuck in the same 4 walls, and since I'm not a millionaire and I can't just go anywhere in my house and take a swim or, play some tennis, it was really hard after being stuck in the same house for a whole year. It was starting to get to me, and I had difficulty concentrating on my work, and in the end I was like barely doing the class required and all the work that I had to do. And that time I was starting to realize that time had really stopped and that I really was missing something. And I feel like this was that I had missed a lot of key events that I usually celebrate in a year, and I wasn't able to celebrate important days, and I was starting to realize that I felt so trapped in time. It was like I was in a glass cube where I could see everything outside me, but I couldn't go out there and touch it or experience it. I was kind of just stuck there banging on the walls, waiting to be let out, just wanting to escape, and I was exhausted. It really sucked, and at one point it was suffocating. When lockdown started easing, I began to realize that going out into the world after so long, I had actually forgotten little things about the life I used to live before. The first time I sat in a car after so many months, I almost forgot to put on my seatbelt, even though putting on a seatbelt was just an intrinsic habit in my life, and I never thought I would forget no matter what happened. But just a few months of not repeating that had made me forget what it felt, and I feel like it also contributed that the lockdown was so rigorous, and it was just like it forced you into a little corner and into a little mind state that maybe I wouldn't have forgotten that that's how it feels like to sit in a car if I had just chosen to stay home for a few months. The first time I went to Coles, which is a supermarket chain, after months of not going, I almost cried because it's just that I was suddenly given so much freedom. It was like a bird being let out of its cage, and I looked around at everything and it just all seemed so normal when I know it wasn't normal. I feel like I learned a lot from this lockdown, and I really learned that I'm not really in charge of my life, that try all I will, I'm not the master of my life. I'm just another human in a world with many other people, with animals and plants, and I really don't have any power when nature comes to fight. And another thing that I learned was to be grateful. And though I really do try to be grateful for everything I have, because I know I'm in a very privileged position in the world, I do try to reflect on that and be incredibly grateful to have this position. But also I began to realize that we have cars that are able to drive us around anywhere. We could get pretty much whatever we want, and we can go to the supermarket. They're just easily accessible, and I can get whatever I want from there too. And it just made me realize that these things that I thought were so normal in my life really weren't, and I began to value my freedom a little bit more. And now with this new freedom, I have a sort of different outlook on life, and I want to continue through life, and I want to remember this as a very important step in my growth. And I also want to end my story there, but I don't want to end on such a sour note, so we're gonna look at some memes. So now we're going to look at some memes of last year's lockdown, and then we're going to progress into some memes of the current lockdown we're in, simply because now we're not at the bottom of the barrel and the object of the joke anymore, and we like to pass that on. Victoria. The rest of the world. Honestly, that is kind of what it felt like, because you would listen to the news and you would just like hear about people from other states doing things that you literally couldn't do, which were literally illegal to do at that time. They could leave their houses, they could go shopping, and it kind of sucked to be watching from what did look like a cage. Yeah, not gonna lie, everyone was looking at Victoria and just Melburnians in general so weirdly, and it sucked. Like, that's not the reputation we want to have, so it really sucked. And also because we kind of do have the reputation for being the cool kids of Australia anyways. Oh, okay, so if you don't know, we have the Melbourne Cup in Melbourne, surprisingly, and it's basically just a bunch of horse races, but like when you go there you have to dress really extravagant and fancy. I'll put up some pictures, and this is actually a meme that is kind of jumping onto the extravagant hats and the elaborate clothes and bows and colours that are usually present at the Melbourne Cup with masks, which is actually pretty cool. And actually, I don't really remember if there was any cool masks from last year's lockdown Melbourne Cup. I'll check. Okay, now we're gonna move on to the actually funny memes, which are memes of this year's lockdown, because I feel like even though Victoria was kind of messed up last year, people didn't really have the heart to make fun of us, probably because the situation was like actually really bad. But this year it's all Sydney's fault, so no one really feels bad for saying anything. So for context, what happened was that in Sydney there was an outbreak because there was a limousine driver who picked up some flight crew from the airport and he transported them, and then he proceeded to spread the Delta strain to pretty much everyone in Sydney. And some people from Sydney, actually 3 removalists from Sydney, came to Melbourne and they spread it here, and they're the reason why we're in lockdown, so we really hate them right now. And the rest of Australia is also not doing the greatest, like they really hate Sydney, and I think there might be some minor outbreaks in some of these states, but I'm not too sure on that. The more important thing is that Melbourne was free. Melbourne was actually doing the best out of all of the states before those 3 removalists came, and so we hate them. So this meme is actually pretty irrelevant because all of the states, they were falling and Melbourne was like actually winning for once. But you see Sydney there. Sydney put an arm and hooked it under our foot and they made us fall. We don't like Sydney. Actually, we never liked Sydney. That's a bit more of a historical animosity than just COVID, but this is fueling the fire. So the Montague Bridge, as you can see in this picture, is very famous for just peeling off the tops of trucks. And the removalists, well, I'm pretty sure they came in trucks. So we're planning, actually, as a society, to remove the Montague Bridge from where it is, put it at the Victoria-New South Wales border, and stop removalists from Sydney coming in. But they're actually banned from coming in now, so that's good. Pretty sure this is the first time that something originated in Sydney has actually taken off in Melbourne. Again, this is referencing the animosity that Melbourne and Sydney don't really like each other. They've been at odds for years, for over a century actually. And it's hilarious. Melburnians don't like Sydney-siders, that's what they're called. It's an absolutely absurd name, but Melburnians don't like Sydney-siders, and so we don't really accept anything that they do. But this is the first time something has taken off, and it is the Delta strain of the virus. We just arrived from New South Wales. What should we get? Screwed. As they should. We really do not like them at the moment. Honestly, why? There are still people traveling, and it's just insane to me. Like, why would you still travel? This man, I don't know if you've seen other Melbourne memes, but this man is actually the Victorian State Premier. So he is basically in charge of running the state, and he makes most of the important decisions, and that's why he's everywhere, because he calls the shots. They are bitter. They're bitter about Sydney. When time is over and the teacher is still not finishing up the online class, just finish up the damn class already. Actually, if a teacher was really going over time, what I would do is I would just pick up my iPad, which is what we got from the school at that time, and I would just walk to the other section of my house where I needed to do the next thing, like maybe I had to make food or something, and I would just take the iPad with me because we had our cameras off most of the time. And because if you're gonna waste my time, I'm not gonna listen to you, okay? Our lesson is over, our time is done. I really need to do something else. Like, usually they were just repeating things that they've already said, like, yeah, you've told us that, we can move on now. Hello, where are you from? Southwestern Sydney. God, so far. That's actually where the outbreak really started. Bondi, which is a very famous place and a beach. was actually where the strain spread. The limousine driver was everywhere there, and that's where the main outbreak was. And so people do not like that. They do not like that. The people have spoken. And so that kind of wraps it all up. I want to thank you for watching, and I hope that maybe you got some insight about our lives here in Melbourne from this video, and maybe you also laughed a bit with the memes.